thank you so much for coming out this afternoon to just listen to this Q&A session with the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm Elaine Chan, and I work down at 75 Hawthorne, just 3 blocks away from there. And the EPA started in, guess what year? Anybody want to draw a year? Nope. Close.
75. 79.
No.
Yes.
The answer is December 2nd, 1970. That's when the EPA started. And we're located again at 75 Hawthorne, and our headquarters is in DC. We have 10 regional offices, and we're Region 9 in San Francisco. And our regional office covers California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Guam Islands.
Arizona. Did you say Arizona?
Yes, Arizona. 27 labs and research centers. And if you want to learn more about this, you can go to www.epa.gov. And again, the overall mission of EPA is to protect human health and the environment. So today, we have a panel of our elite, I call them the elite members of our agency. They're on the 16th floor of 75 Hawthorne, and I want them to introduce themselves. And after that, I will start asking questions. And also feel free to raise your hand, and then you can ask your question if you like. So Larry, let's go with you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Larry Bradfish. I've been with EPA for about 10 years. Before that, I'm an attorney. Before that, I was with DOI, Department of the Interior, for about 4 years. Before that, private practice, 6 or 7 years. Department of Justice, 4 years. And before that, I was a geologist doing exploration for gold and uranium for about 6 or 7 years. So I've had sort of a checkered past. But lately, my home has been EPA.
I'm Letitia Moore. I'm also an attorney with EPA. I've spent my entire legal career at EPA. So I've been there, I'm trying to do the math really quickly here, 23 and a half years. And I've done a variety of things at EPA. Talk about what we do later.
But. My name is Amy Miller, and I've been at EPA for 18 years. I actually went to Golden Gate University, and so we're going to talk about our jobs later.
Well, but so you're not.
Oh, so I've spent my entire career at EPA as well. And I am not an attorney for the agency. I've worked in the enforcement program the entire time, working as an investigator, and now I'm the deputy director for the entire enforcement program.
I'm Noah Smith, and I have been with EPA for just 2 years. I graduated from law school in 2010, and only worked with EPA. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone. The first question. What type of cases do you work on?
Okay. I work mostly with what they call Superfund, mostly abandoned mine cleanups, kind of gravitated towards that, having a geology background. And I do a lot of other stuff related to Superfund, CERCLA actions, and then also I do a little bit of RCRA stuff, RCRA compliance and enforcement. And that's kind of a minor part of what I do. Mostly it's dealing with the CERCLA cases.
Okay, so we talk in acronyms.
Does everybody know what that is? Yeah.
So I'm going to try not to do too many acronyms. So, but CERCLA is the Superfund statute. It's basically hazardous waste cleanup. So where either the government's going in and doing cleanup, or we're ordering other people to go in and do cleanup where their activities in the past have led to contamination in soil or groundwater or something else. RCRA is hazardous waste management. It's where any type of company, whatever they're manufacturing or processing, they may be generating hazardous waste. And the RCRA regulations are all about how you manage your waste, how you handle it at your facility, where you dispose of it, the paperwork that goes. It's called sort of cradle to grave, so we know from beginning to end who generated it, who transported it, where it was disposed of, where it was treated, where it ended up. So hopefully it doesn't become a Superfund hazardous waste cleanup site. in the future. Okay, so I'm going to try to stay away from the acronyms. I do hazardous waste work. Prior to that, I did Clean Air Act type stuff. I've done toxics and record keeping sort of stuff. Generally what EPA does, the lawyers, we've got cleanup work, which will involve counseling the folks who actually go out and do the cleanup or order the cleanups. We do enforcement of cleanup orders, finding the people who need to do the cleanup. We also do cost recovery where we've done the cleanup work and we go after folks to get their money. We do defensive litigation where EPA's been sued because EPA has to promulgate regulations or issue permits or do something that one of our statutes says you need to do, and someone sues us and says you didn't do it. So we have attorneys who work on defensive litigation. We have lots of counseling work. So you have folks at EPA who are writing regulations, and so they need lawyers to advise them on a variety of things. We have folks who are working on capacity building or authorization or delegations with states and tribes, helping them do things or implement federal law in their jurisdictions. We have lawyers who will counsel the EPA folks who are assisting in those sorts of things. We have lawyers who work on contracts and grants where we're giving money to states or tribes or other organizations. We have an attorney who does labor and employment stuff because we are an employer. We have an ethics official, a lawyer who counsels us on conflict of interest and ethics, federal ethics issues. We have other statutes that we need to deal with, whether it's providing information to the public when it's requested, or having to do environmental reviews on projects we may be involved in, or other statutes that may be not specifically the statutes that we implement, but we have some compliance with it. So we have attorneys who counsel people about that. We have permitting, so under the various statutes, we may be doing permitting, or the state may be doing permitting under federal laws or state laws, and we have attorneys who counsel the folks who write the permits or review the permits. And then there are a variety of state and tribal cooperation, grants, all sorts of issues with the states and tribes, and we have attorneys who counsel on those. I call those our counseling attorneys. And then we have regulatory enforcement attorneys who work with the inspectors and the folks who are actually bringing enforcement cases, and that's what I do right now. So for most of my career, I've done regulatory enforcement over a variety of statutes. So I work with inspectors and folks calculating penalties. I'm usually negotiating settlements. Occasionally I'm in federal district court or in an administrative process basically I'm telling someone when you've done something wrong, you need to come into compliance and you need to pay. I talk to a lot of people over the course of my day. And most of the things I just described, cleanup work, defensive litigation, counseling, and enforcement, I've done some of that in the last 23, what did I say, 23 and a half years.
Great. So I actually work in the program. I don't work in the legal office. And for my career, I've always worked with other inspectors working on investigations, gathering facts, and putting together a case. And then working with our attorneys on those cases. So my role in cases has been more fact-oriented, making sure that we have all of the facts. Most of the people I work with are scientists and engineers. I'm kind of unique, but the things that I do is really help with investigations and make sure that we have everything that we need. Right now, I'm in a new position because we just created a new division. We've consolidated all of our enforcement programs in one division. And so in my new role, I touch on everything. But I used to work a lot on cases and have had to testify for the agency, and then also just have done a lot of field work. Been all over from Guam to tribal lands out in Arizona, investigating things from pesticide use to water issues to hazardous waste issues.
I do all Clean Air Act work, and Letitia mentioned sort of the counseling attorneys, and I'm essentially a counseling attorney. I work a lot on permitting issues, so PSD permits, Title V permits.
That's an acronym.
Yeah, prevention of significant deterioration. And I also do some work on local and national rulemakings. So under the Clean Air Act, states will promulgate their own laws to be implemented at the state level, but they have to comply with the Clean Air Act if they're implementing the Clean Air Act. And so we'll review those and make sure that they are compliant with the act. And then I actually also do some tribal law work, and it's mostly Clean Air Act related, so delegations of certain Clean Air Act programs to the various tribes. Does anybody know how many tribes we have in Region 9?
139, right?
Either 130 or 150 federally recognized
It
tribes.
ends
Yeah.
with a 9 and it begins with a 1.
So over 100 federally recognized
Yeah.
tribes in our region, just in our region.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of tribes, and yeah, that's.
Thank you, Philip. Second question is, tell us about challenges you faced when working on a specific case and how that was resolved. So, Larry.
Okay, I mentioned that I work on like abandoned mine sites and things, and I had one site, actually we were still working on it, it's been going for about 20 years now. It's a mercury mine up in Northern California, and it was contaminating a lake nearby. There was a mining company involved, it was a family-run mining company. The family that ran the mining company had a bunch of land up there. There was an Indian tribe right next door to the mine. There were some federal agencies involved that had some participation in where the mine tailings were ultimately spread. Some of them ended up on the Indian reservation. And we tried to reach some kind of settlement with the mining company and the family that ran the mining company. They wouldn't settle. We ended up suing them in federal court for recovery of our cleanup costs that we've incurred already and that we will incur in the future. They said, well, we don't really have any money. And that was one of the big challenges is, well, who's going to pay for this cleanup? Typically, in these kind of situations where nobody has any money or you can't find the viable party that is viable financially, the government ends up paying the bills. The taxpayer ends up paying for these cleanups. And they're expensive. They're several $1 million. This one, in fact, we estimate is probably going to be over $80 to $100 million before we get done cleaning up the mine site. And so the question is, well, what do you do in a situation like that? And we found that the family owned some property up there. They had some insurance policies. We spent a lot of time working with the family, trying to reach a settlement with them. They couldn't pay for the entire cleanup. We knew that. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how can we divide this property up, sell some of it. The Indian tribe really wanted some of the land to compensate them for some of the harm that was caused to their lands by the mine tailings that were placed there. And we ultimately worked out a settlement where the land was divided up and we got some, or we have it put into a trust that will be sold and the money will go back into the super fund. It won't be anywhere near the amount of money that we spend ultimately on the cleanup. But we're trying to work out things where you have competing interests and a limited pot of money or resources available to try to give everybody a fair share of it and make it work. And a lot of times we reach impasses with these parties. We spent probably almost 5 to 10 years working out a settlement in this particular mine site. And we finally reached it about a year ago. We're still after some of the insurance companies, and we probably will be for a number of years before we finally get settlements from the insurance companies. But it's a complicated set of factors. There's a lot of competing interests, and it takes a lot of effort to make something actually happen and work that's going to benefit the environment and also benefit the people that were harmed or injured by it.
So I think one of the challenges that I continue to run up against working for EPA is who's the client. So as Amy's one of them. As a government employee, I'm in a huge bureaucracy. I've got my management, I've got an inspector, a middle manager, a division director in some program office, whether it's air, water, waste, Superfund. I've also got now an enforcement division with a variety of managers there. I've got a regional administrator who is the elected the appointed official who heads this entire region. Did I mention my regional council? I've got my regional council. And then we have headquarters. And those program offices and legal offices and ultimately the administrator of EPA. And there's also the president who could weigh in if they wanted to. So what I always found challenging when I first started working at EPA was in any given particular controversy, if you don't have agreement amongst my office and Amy's office, or the managers in Amy's office, or the managers in another program office, who ultimately is the client that gets to make that final decision. You can't always say I'm going all the way to the top, because on a day-to-day basis, you've got to sort that out. And so I think as a government attorney, you're trying to sort out who's the client, who you're representing, and whose interests you really need to be at the forefront of helping to make these decisions and making recommendations. And sometimes I'm kind of the client because the Department of Justice represents EPA in federal district court. So I'm both attorney and client in a particular transaction as that in that moment, though I still have Amy or someone else in the office who is my client. So I think that's the interesting challenge.
Let's see, I think one of the biggest challenges from the enforcement standpoint is time is always of the essence. Time passes so fast, and in order to build a case, you have to move quickly. And sometimes how you gather evidence, the rules aren't that clear or they change. I was in the middle of working on one case, and a Supreme Court decision came down on the Clean Water Act. It was a very large Clean Water Act case in Arizona, and the Supreme Court ruled in this case called Rapanos about what was a waters of the United States, and they gave very vague directions as to what exactly that was, and differing opinions. And here I was in the middle of a case, and kind of was left with, well, how does that impact our ongoing case? And trying to figure that out as we're marching towards trial in Phoenix. And so it was very challenging to figure out what kind of evidence we would need to meet this new Supreme Court decision. And so a lot of it was trial and error, going out in the field, gathering things, we weren't exactly certain what, and so trying to come up with our own game plan, how we think we could tell our story. So I think that's been probably one of the more challenging things for me. So.
I guess for me, I'm still relatively new at the agency and relatively new coming out of law school. I've been in EPA for 2 years, and one of the really great things about working there is that I get a lot of responsibility right away. And so, I'm the lead attorney for our region on various cases, and sometimes, I feel a little bit in over my head, or I'm interacting with people in headquarters or other regions who might have a lot more experience than I do, and so just sort of like juggling and various interests and people's expertise, like on a particular case, it's definitely been challenging. And I think one nice thing about our office is that everyone is really accessible, and so for me, I think one of the ways in sort of like trying to problem solve if I come across an issue that I don't know about or that I'm uncertain about is just going to someone who's got more experience or who's more senior, and talking to them and talking through the issues with them. And fortunately, the people in our office are really accessible, so I try to do that as much as I can, because we have people in our office with just a lot of experience, and it's a great environment for me as a young attorney to learn.
Think back to when you first started at the EPA. Can you think of anything you've learned that you wish your coworkers would have told you about?
Let's start over.
Noah.
Well, this is kind of, I was thinking about this question last night, and it's kind of a tough question. So I actually interned at EPA when I was still in law school, and then when I got a job with them, I already kind of knew a lot of the attorneys, and I knew my way around a little bit from having interned there. And so, it's hard. Like I don't feel like nothing jumps out that I feel like people would have alerted me to, except for things that are kind of like have been unforeseen to all of us. I feel like in general, and I mentioned this just in my previous comment, that people's doors are always open and people are really accessible. So generally, if something comes up that I'm unsure about or whatever, I feel like I can always kind of go to one of the attorneys in the office, and so I don't feel like I'm ever kind of being thrown into something without kind of knowing what I'm getting into, at least a little bit.
At EPA, we sit in cubes,
That's why our doors are
That's
open.
why,
Doors, roofs, walls,
yeah.
always open.
Yeah, and so when I first started, I started as an intern as well in the toxics program, and then I moved over to pesticides. And when I first started pesticides, they put me in this cube, and there was a filing cabinet, and it was all full of cases, case files. The states would refer us cases, saying, oh, you gotta take this. So this whole filing cabinet was full on it, and I thought, I'm gonna take every single one of these, something has to be done, and so I was like, I've gotta address every single one, whether we take an enforcement action or not, I need to send them a letter. And I think over time I realized, we have to pick and choose what we're gonna do. I mean, yeah, there is a lot, it can be overwhelming sometimes. The amount of things that come across our desk that really we ought to be taking enforcement actions on. And we have to pick and choose which ones we are gonna do. And I was literally taking the top filing cabinet drawer, taking one out and going, okay, let's get going. And I realized, yeah, we gotta definitely select which cases we do. Prioritize, yes.
So as it happens, I also was an intern in this office. So I interned in this office while I was in law school, and then started working after law school. And I think the thing that I wish someone had told me is just an overview of all the things that EPA does. Because, I've been at this 20 plus years, and I still have not touched everything that EPA does. But it touches me in some way in that, I'm working on something. It would be good to know that we do that and there's someone else I should go ask to see if what I'm doing is going to impact something else that EPA does. And frankly, when I started as an attorney, I've been at EPA 2 years as an intern at different times off and on. And I had done a variety of things, and I was sort of like, I got a sense of what we do and what the attorneys do. I get hired as an attorney. They dropped 20 enforcement cases on me. I'd never worked in that program. I'd never worked in outbreaks. I'd actually never done enforcement in the 2 years. I've been doing counseling and other sorts of stuff. I've never touched administrative practice in terms of the enforcement side. I didn't fully understand the relationship with DOJ, and all of a sudden I had these enforcement cases. So I would have liked for someone to just give me an overview of this agency and what all we do, just so that I had just a small clue before I started as an attorney.
I guess my answer is no. I think the thing is, you kind of learn as you go, and somebody can tell you a whole bunch of crap at the beginning of when you work, and you say, okay, and then go back and say, what did that mean? I mean, you really do have to learn it on the job and learn where it all fits together, and somebody can't tell you that. You really do have to feel your way around until you understand it. And it's good to have an open door where you can go in and ask somebody a question when you finally figure out that I need to know this issue or this matter. How do I deal with it? And that's what I do. I mean, it's not like they can download all this stuff on you when you first arrive or anything. You have to kind of pick your way through it and say, well, here's an issue. How do I deal with it? If you don't know how to deal with it, talk to somebody that has dealt with it and figure it out from there. Sometimes you're winging it, and that's the way it is. And a lot of times, you're out on the edge of the envelope, and you're doing something that nobody else has done. So that's good too. It's kind of fun.
Have you ever faced any political pressures within the EPA or from other organizations or entities?
Sort of, but indirectly. We're not supposed to be talking to politicians, I mean, especially at our levels and stuff. Sometimes we'll get a call from a congressperson or whatever, you're not supposed to be really responding to them, you're supposed to be handling that through certain channels within EPA, through our public relations or congressional people. But we still do have to respond to congressional inquiries. They could be in writing. I've been over to Senator Boxer's office and Senator Feinstein's office to brief staff on various issues related to some of the cases, including the one that I was just talking about, the mine case. So it does happen, but you really shouldn't be directly influenced by politicians. You should try to resist that, and you should try to move that into the aspects of the agency that are really designed or intended to deal with congressional inquiries and responses.
So I agree with that. We don't necessarily get, a politician, knocking on your door, calling your phone and try to do something to you, but there are pressures that impact what we do. I think for me, the answer to this question is our states. So, we're doing things in a state's jurisdiction, or we're trying to encourage them to do things, and their elected leaders and their sort of higher ups and appointeds want things done a certain way, depending on the state we're in. They don't want us there at all. And they will exert pressure that will impact the work I'm doing, the way I'm doing it, the amount of coordination I need to do with them. And sometimes they just don't want EPA to do what they're doing at all. And they try to exert pressure directly on other people that will impact the work that I do.
Yeah, I would ditto a lot of what these guys are saying, and congressional requests, it's not a direct influence, but it's more an indirect. They want to know what you're doing, and so that takes some time to respond to, and you get it from different levels. You get it from the federal government and from locals as well. I once was working on a case in the pesticide program, and we were working it. It was quite controversial at the time. It was a biotech case. It was a new area that we were working in, and really hadn't heard anything from anybody. And then after the case had come to completion, we had heard that we had gotten the green light from the White House. And to this day, I never even knew that apparently we had gotten the green light from the White House. So,
But you had.
apparently. So that's probably about it.
Yeah, I don't think I don't really felt any political pressures, at least directly. Working on the Clean Air Act, we're often, Clean Air Act is often in sort of like the news or in the political crosshairs or whatever. And so, I think we've had some rules that, we try to promulgate nationally that have not gone through because of political pressures. It sort of affects like the work I do, but it's never I'm never the one who's on the phone dealing with that sort of thing. So.
I'd like to give an opportunity out to the audience who likes to go first.
Sure.
Questions?
Questions, perfect. So just kind of get to the heart of what we're interested in, being students, and the idea of the panel being about careers at the EPA. What kind of demand for attorneys does the EPA have right now? And associated with that, what kind of skills do you think as students and people who are, some of us are 1L, some of us are graduating, what kind of experience we should gather to be really successful if we were to get in or try to? And then also attached to that, if anyone has an idea of what the internship programs are like there, what can we expect if we were to apply for that?
I can do a little bit of that. I think we'll all add to it, but I think number one, and for me anyway, was commitment to environmental law. And I was a geologist for a number of years. I was interested in land law, public land law, and how public resources were being used. I audited classes in law school when I was in graduate school, and I have a couple of degrees in geology. But I was always interested in that aspect of it. And that translated into a law career when my geology job seemed to be drying up, and I thought, I need to retool. And my only choice and my only desire was to get into environmental law. And you know, I had this background of being a geologist. I think that helped quite a bit when I went through law school. I took some environmental law courses when I was in law school. I think those were helpful. Administrative law courses are helpful. But it's that commitment, that dedication, that experience that you bring that I think makes the difference between getting chosen for an environmental law job and not. And if you've shown that kind of commitment over the years, then I think maybe you've got a better chance of getting in. I got into the DOJ honors program out of law school. I still to this day don't know why they chose me. There were hundreds of applicants. But I think in part it was because I had a background that was in geology and sciences, and there was something different about my career path that other people hadn't had in their lifetime. And I think that helps. So I would definitely look, when we look at resumes, we look at, there's a lot of people filing filing resumes and applying for a very limited number of jobs. And we're always looking, well, what kind of experience do they have? Are they really serious about what they're asking for? And that's very important, I think.
So I would say the basics is you need strong analytical skills, strong writing skills, and strong oral skills. If you don't have that, you're sort of no use to us. I mean, you do literally get thrown in, and immediately you will have a caseload. Not a case, a caseload of stuff that you need to do. It's a very competitive field generally. EPA gets tons of people interested in internships, fellowships, and jobs when we have them. And so Larry's right, that demonstrated interest and commitment to the environmental field is one of those things that you sort of start to move the resumes around and decide who you're going to be talking to further. In terms of getting hired right now, sequestration. We are not hiring. Under normal circumstances, we have an internship program where we've had summer interns, and we've also had interns during the school year. I think we've had interns from Golden Gate both in the summer and during the school year. We have a fellowship. We normally have a fellowship program where recent grads come in for a 2-year fellowship. And our office is divided into 2 branches, and so they get a year in each branch, and then they go off and do things. They've gone off to clerk for state Supreme Court. They've gone off to work at different law firms and do different things generally in the environmental law field. And then we most often, for attorney hires, tend to hire laterally, but we do hire directly out of law school occasionally. And we don't hire necessarily that often. But right now, we're not hiring. I don't even know if we have the authority to do volunteer internships. But the way to find out is www.epa.gov, and you look for Office of Regional Counsel, which is the office that the lawyers sit in, and look at job opportunities or career opportunities. I'm not sure how it's tagged, but you want to go to the EPA website, to this region, which is Region 9, to the Office of Regional Counsel, and then start looking at what we're doing in terms of, we'll have information about internships, fellowships, and hiring if it ever happens again in my lifetime. And that is true for all of the regional offices. So not all of the offices have fellowships, but most of the offices have done interns, and if they're hiring, they're hiring. And then in Washington, we have attorneys in the Office of General Counsel and in the Office of Enforcement. And so, again, you want to go to the website and look either in the regional offices or look in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, OECA. And look, or Office of General Counsel, OJC, and those are where you'll find lawyers doing lawyering. And then there's also the lawyers doing other things in the agency. But again, EPA is very committed to its website, I would say, and so they do tend to try to keep it up to date. But right now, the federal government is in a strange, unusual place.
So, I just want to say, because I'm a little bit different than these guys in a lot of ways, and when I started EPA, I never intended to be, I mean, I went to law school, I'm licensed to be, I'm licensed as an attorney and everything. I actually did the joint public administration program here with a master's in public administration. I don't even know if they still have it or not. And I was more interested in going into public service. And in fact, I didn't even take environmental law classes when I was here. I was focused on international law. I was planning on going into the Foreign Service. My professor in public administration told me about an internship over at EPA, and he said, you should apply. And I'm like, there's no way. There's all these people that, who love environment, that are very focused on it. I'll never get an internship there. And I applied and I got it, and I was like totally stunned. And one thing led to another, and I loved it. But I always made it clear to the people that I was interviewing that I was not interested in going to Office of Regional Counsel. I was very interested in public service and being in
public service.
No, I mean like not being an attorney, but like doing public administration. I meant, and so and I think. That's one thing that when we do look at attorneys that are interested in program positions, that is probably our biggest question is are you just trying to get into Office of Regional Counsel? Because if that's so, then you need to apply for one of our positions over there and not in the program. But I do think attorneys bring great skills as investigators. It's great to have a mix of skills, not just engineers and scientists. And so if that's the path you want, you can always give me a call, and I'd be glad to talk to you. At some point, I hope that we'll be able to hire. We're making plans, but who knows?
So you have a question?
I have a question about, many of you seem like you've been at the EPA for a long time, maybe not in private practice, but what would you say your experience working in the government is, like making a difference in environmental law to working with Sierra Club or Earth Justice, or it just seems hard, like we hear about the bureaucracy and
Maybe I can.
where can you like make, it's probably too general, like more of a difference, or the frustrations that you really like about the EPA that maybe you couldn't get out of working for another person?
I think I'm the only one that hasn't worked for
We're
government
just
all
right left
my
on
life. I worked in private practice, and it can be satisfying. Stuff that I did was mostly kind of super fund related. We had clients that were housing developers, home developers. They got snookered, they bought some land, and it turned out there were all kinds of drums of contaminated chemicals buried on that land. And so we were trying to help our client out and try to go after the people responsible for those drums and get them to pay for the cleanup, which was going to be, $20, $30 million. So, yeah, I think there is a way to, find satisfaction in other areas outside of the government. And I did like the time that I was there. I don't know that I was ever cut out to be a partner generating a book of business and all that sort of thing. I don't fancy myself a salesman. And I do find the government objectives more to my own personal views, I guess. You may find that you may want to go to like Sierra Club or some other place, Earth Justice, where they have a more, focus more on resources entirely or environment, whereas government is kind of in between. Sometimes you have to look at competing interests and help accommodate all of those interests. You may find that maybe the environmental organizations are less tolerant of that. Private practice, you may see that your client really doesn't care much about the environment, they just want to get a result, and you're there to get the result. So you have to make those kind of choices, I think, on a personal basis. And sometimes you don't have any choice. In this limited job market, it's tough to get a job, period. And so you may have to go wherever you can to get those jobs. And I don't know that you're really precluding yourself from going on later to work for the government or an environmental organization if you were in private practice or any of the other ways around. So all experience is good, I think.
So I want to follow up on that about all experience being good. You asked about being able to make a difference. You can make a difference wherever you are. I mean, just in terms of talking about environmental law, the field is huge in terms of the type of lawyers that today call themselves environmental lawyers. And they are environmental lawyers because just the issues we deal with, the types of things you have to deal with, whether it's planning and development, sustainable stuff, regulatory enforcement, natural resource protection, there's all this stuff that all involves environmental issues, which is basically how humans are interacting with the natural environment, what we're doing to help and what we're doing to hurt. So whether you're in private practice, working for, doing transactional work with developers or people who are buying property and trying to figure out what to do, whether you're representing companies who have environmental obligations that they need to live up to or try to avoid, whether you're working internationally with companies that are they're doing their business here and doing their business abroad and trying to figure out what their environmental obligations are going to be, and sometimes it's about what's the current law or what the law is going to be in the future, whether you're working for states or counties or cities who have environmental obligations themselves as actors and also do environmental regulation, whether you're working for Earth Justice or NRDC or any one of the many organizations who occasionally sue us, or are working with cities and states to get things done, or working with communities to help things happen in their communities or not happen in their communities, or you're working for government doing regulatory work, which is what EPA is, a regulatory agency. All of that is useful, all of that is interesting, all of it involves doing environmental work. So there's a lot of stuff out there, even municipal law. So I used to be on the city council. Municipal lawyers are fascinating, and they're doing environmental work in terms of helping cities when they're purchasing properties or doing projects or doing permitting and doing another acronym, CEQA, analysis and review. So if you're interested in environmental law, be broad in the places that you can do something and make a difference in terms of how we are impacting our natural environment.
To play off that last question, I guess I'm curious for each of you, what drew you to the EPA, and for all of you, but Noah, I suppose, what has kept you there for so long? Because, 20 years is a fair number of years to be at one place, so.
You want me to start? What drew me to EPA? A promise of a permanent position from where I was at DOI. I had a temporary position. I liked the work at DOI, Department of the Interior. I was advising the Park Service on a lot of really, really interesting issues and stuff. But the job situation was such that I didn't feel that that it was maybe would last forever. And EPA had some openings. It looked interesting. I've always been interested in, I hate to use the word CERCLA, but CERCLA issues, Superfund cleanups and things like that. I had gotten interested in that when I was at the Department of Justice. I had worked primarily there with wildlife statutes, Endangered Species Act and stuff, but there was some crossover with Superfund sites too. So it all kind of worked together. I felt that it was really interesting work at EPA, and I've stayed at EPA again because the work is interesting, the people are really great to work with. Everybody is very helpful when you go in and ask a question or something. It's a good place to work, really.
So I was interested in planning and development. I worked for the planning department when I was in college. And so I went to law school with the intention of doing government work. I was interested in public service and government, both sort of on the micro and the macro level, but I was really more interested in planning and considered getting a planning degree, but thought it was too narrow. And I decided to get a law degree, figuring it opened more doors in terms of government. I met someone who worked at EPA, and they were really, really interesting and really excited about what they did. And so I said, well, I'll come intern with you for a summer. And 20 plus years later, I'm still there. I'm still there because the work is fascinating, like on a day-to-day basis. Regulatory work is interesting because I feel like I'm constantly trying to solve a problem. I like the idea that I work with all these professionals in different fields. So I've been learning about, against my will because I'm a non-scientist, hydrogeology and toxicology, and you name an IS, we got one in our agency. You know, I like investigation because, again, I think it's a problem-solving sort of thing. So for me, the actual work is interesting, the people are fascinating, and even though I've been doing this for 20+ years, again, there are tons of stuff I've never done that also will be interesting. And I've actually, in my practice, done a lot because I've worked in a number of the different programs and sort of almost all of the different types of work that the lawyers do. So I think environmental law is just fascinating. It continues to evolve and do things in weird and crazy ways. We weren't talking about climate change when I was getting out of law school. We weren't putting together environmental issues and sustainability when I was getting out of law school, though that would have like totally psyched me out at the time because I was interested in planning. So it's just a fascinating field. And I like government, I like the frustrations and the bureaucracy of it. I like the micro negotiating and working through the different levels I have to work through. And I like being part of something that's got sort of bigger purpose, even if it can be frustrating at times. So for me, the government thing works, and this field, I think, is just fascinating.
And you're stealing all my words again. Jeez. I mean, I've done a lot of what Letitia says. I never intended, you know, these internships, man, they suck you in. And I had no intention of staying at EPA. I was planning to go in the Foreign Service. And as soon as I started doing enforcement work, I loved it. I found my dream job. And the great thing about EPA is, you know, I would get, I guess, a 7-year itch or something, and I'm done with pesticides, move on to water, try something new, just to mix it up a little. And yeah, they're all like very different little worlds in a way, and you kind of build upon all of those experiences and bring your experiences from the past. So it's been fantastic, and the people we work with, it's a really good place to work. We have a really great office here in San Francisco, and have long-lasting friendships. And so, yes, I'd say a lot of people who come and work, especially in our regional office, tend to stay for a very, very long time for their whole career.
We're the best regional.
And that's actually was a big thing that drew me, you know, when I first interned at EPA, was just finding out that most of the attorneys had been there for 15, 20+ years, and that it really was a place to make a career, and that people were really happy in their careers there. And I guess, you know, just more generally, I was drawn to government work as well. My parents were both federal employees. I've got an aunt and uncle that work in the Foreign Service. And so I don't know, it was a familiar environment, so to speak, and so I was drawn to it for that, and you know, I sort of had not a career, but you know, just a lot of experience doing like public service type work, and so it seemed to align with that as well as just a general interest in environmental issues.
Don't let the bureaucracy scare you off. I mean, everybody says, oh, you've got a big bureaucracy. Well, you do. But I worked in a lot of private practice areas, whether it was a geologist or an attorney. There's always somebody asking you for your timesheet or your trip report and stuff. There's a bureaucracy wherever you're going to go, and it's maybe a little less than the government, maybe it'll be even more, you never know. So you're going to face that no matter where you work. It's just a matter of what you can tolerate, I guess.
So Amy, you mentioned enforcement actions and not being able to do everything.
Yeah.
As environmentalists, it seems like it's really hard to take all the environmental problems. So as you have guys have been working in the EPA for so long, do you feel more hopeful? Do you feel like you're able to make an impact?
No, we were talking about this before.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. What do you think?
I'm an optimistic person. I feel very proud of the things we have done, and feel like, gosh, there's more we can do. Come on, Letitia, let's get going. And so that's just, I think, partly my personality, but sometimes it can be overwhelming. And some of the things I've seen have broken my heart. And especially, I don't know, just some environmental damage, when you see something that cannot be brought back. it's tough, you know, and that really does definitely take a toll, but there's so much that we can still do, and there's so much more that, you know, that all of us can do to make a difference. So.
Yeah, I'm on the hopeful side. I don't know if it's so much my personality, but maybe it. But I feel like I've seen just this field and what's happening in the world around us, in the environment around us, change in the time that I've been in this career. I grew up in Los Angeles, in sort of, let's say downtown Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles. And you know, I remember, you know, smog days being a normal part of life. And I remember places where I would be up high, but I would be unable to see the Hollywood sign, or I'd be unable to see the ocean. I didn't actually know that I was supposed to see them. And then, you know, 10 years after working EPA, and back then I was doing air work, I go home to LA and my eyes aren't burning when I come home, and I'm driving around LA and I can see the ocean from places that I know I was never able to see the ocean, even on the clearest days when I was growing up. And that's because of the Clean Air Act and the work that EPA and the states were doing to deal with various air issues. And so I feel like over time, I've seen it change, and just the fact that the nature of the issues we have to deal with are changing. It's because we've dealt with some of the big and easy ones. The problems EPA was dealing with in 1970 when it was founded, I think that would have been overwhelming. I would have quit and walked away. I mean, there was some scary stuff. You couldn't jump into lakes, you couldn't drink water. I mean, it was really amazing thing. So we have, I mean, climate change is huge. It's huge to figure out how to deal with that, but we've come a long way. So I sort of feel like I'm on the inside track of understanding how much we've done, and how many people are so committed to doing more, whether they're in this agency or outside of this agency. That, yeah, I think it's hope that I have, rather than feeling jaded.
I feel generally optimistic too. I guess I haven't been here long enough to feel jaded, but you know, I think that, you know, what Amy and Letitia have said, I think that a lot of people in the office feel the same way, and you know, I likewise, you know, just I appreciate how much has been done already. I guess the only thing I would add to that is that I think it is kind of a difficult time in the agency right now because of the sequestration, and you know, EPA employees are being furloughed, and we're just having this big cut in our resources and our budget, and so I think that that's going to be challenging going forward. And but you know, fortunately, you know, the people that we have are really committed to what they're doing, and you know, I think it's we're kind of going through a difficult period right now, but I don't think it's, you know, I don't think that's going to last. So
I'm a cynic at heart, and but I've been an attorney in environmental law for 25 years now, and I've seen the changes, and I've seen the change in attitude of people, not just the environmentalists, but the regulated community. People understand that there are environmental laws that are part of doing business, and they're trying to figure out ways to deal with that. Sometimes it's the wrong way, but most people are hiring people to advise them on these issues and to make sure they do the right thing so they're not getting into trouble. And in doing so, the environment's improving. And I think we've seen a marked improvement in the environment over the last 30 years or so. So I'm optimistic about where we're going.
Thank you. 2 more minutes. One last question before we have to close. Do you have any advice for law students or new lawyers? So make it a quick one sentence each of you. Larry, you can start.
Yeah, be careful where you go in terms of. I realize with a real tough job market, it's hard to make choices and have a lot of options and things. But I found that changing fields in the legal profession is difficult. If you can get into something in environmental law related that looks a lot better on your resume than if you were doing immigration law or something else, then you get a stamp on your head, whether you see it or not, that you're an immigration attorney or something, and it's difficult to get that stamp removed from your forehead, especially after a number of years. So my advice is to try to get something in the environmental field if you can, and anything, so that you keep that mark that you're an environmental attorney, if that's really what you want to do.
I would say knowledge is power. So I agree that you don't want to get sort of tied into a particular field and people don't recognize that you're interested in other things. But even if you're working in one area, you can do pro bono work or volunteer work or other stuff in the environmental field. But wherever you are, learn something. Like one of my colleagues that I was on a panel with some years ago, he started out in tax law. And he realized he was attracted to it because he liked regulatory stuff. He liked looking through the books and solving the problem. But he's now in environmental law because that's sort of where his heart was. And he realized that what was interesting about the tax law was solving the problem. But he can do that in environmental law where he's interested. I mean, we have an attorney who is a bankruptcy attorney, and we deal with bankruptcy issues. I mean, corporations is one of those courses that I thought, you know, I'm taking this, but I'm never going to need it. I need it every single day when I'm sorting out who to sue and how to sue them. Like, what's the corporate structure I'm dealing with? But I think wherever you are, use it and learn, whether it's your writing skills, your analytical skills, your oral skills. I mean, you can build skills that will help you do what you want to do. And there's tons of environmental issues to deal with, regardless of whether you're in a field that someone has tagged as environmental law.
Think broadly about your career. Don't narrow it into being a lawyer if you're really interested in the environmental field. You don't have to be a lawyer, even though you all went to law school and I'm sure paid lots of money to this great university. But just, you know, if it's something that you're really passionate about, you know, there are other positions out there, not just law positions.
Say two things. You know, I think this is something I didn't do and I wish I would have, and is try to intern or extern with a judge in either the summer or during the school year, because I really think judges are the most well-connected people in the legal field out there, and that's going to be really helpful. You know, as you're trying to find a job in whatever field, whether it's environmental or public service or whatever, and then also pay a lot of attention to your writing in law school and really work at that, because I think that will also stand out whenever you're applying for jobs after law school.
I just want to thank everybody for coming today, and
Thank you guys.